So today we have a researcher from IBM Consulting, Phaedra Boinodiris. She's the lead on there of IBM Consulting's trustworthy AI effort. She's also it turns out, interestingly enough, a PhD student at UCD University College Dublin in the Smart Lab, where she's pursuing, I think, similar topics to the ones that she's going to present here. Along the way, Phaedra has also been recognized as a member of IBM's Academy of Technology. She was a co-founder of the Future World Alliance, which deals with bringing AI ethics to the K-12 educational world. And she has won recognitions from the United Nations as a woman of influence in STEM, and she was elected a fellow of the London's Royal Society of Arts. So with that, let me just turn it over to Phaedra to lead us through her presentation. I think we should have a presentation for about 40-ish minutes, and then we'll have an open discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really greatly appreciate this opportunity to present to you all. So the topic is on what the Titanic taught us about responsible AI and what we have yet to unlearn. I know it's a very provocative topic. But first, I wanted to introduce a little about me and how I got to this space, my origin story. So my backstory is that I grew up most of my life here in North Carolina, not far from the NC State. My background is in games for entertainment, video games in particular. And I ended up being a serial entrepreneur for about 14 years within that space. I started the first scholarship program for women to pursue degrees in game design and development, and did a lot of consulting to game studios and publishers who wanted to target women. I ended up joining IBM to be our first global lead for serious games, which is when you use video games to do something other than just entertainment, which is where I got my first foray into knowledge management, taking very sophisticated gaming engines and integrating real data and real processes to solve complex problems. But I've always been very devoted to my volunteer work in K through 12. So at the very end, I'm going to be talking a lot about education and what I want to do in education. And the kind of work I'm doing in collaboration with Ishita, who is on this call. In 2018, I got really, really angry watching the news, in particular, watching organizations who were using AI for blatant malintent. And I wanted to learn everything I possibly could about this space, which is why I began pursuing the PhD program. And I learned quickly that even organizations that have the very best of intentions can cause both individual and societal harm, which is why I began this practice within IBM over 2 years ago, a consulting practice helping our clients be more responsible curators of AI. And there are indeed so many stories that keep me up at night. And I'm not going to dwell too long on this because I know this is also your area of expertise too. So you're probably just as familiar about these stories as I am. But it includes things like the state of Michigan procuring an AI model to help predict welfare fraud, and it ran for 3 years with an accuracy score of less than 10%, economically destroying countless families. And there was this big expose in the press recently talking about who is accountable for something like that. Another one, more recently, I'm a fervent supporter of the MIT Technology Review. They have a fantastic publication and wonderful reporters. They had one on the subject of stable diffusion, the AI that generates art. And the reporter, who's a young Asian woman, she was doing a deep dive into what training data is used for stable diffusion. And she put in some text search terms, including the word Asian, and all of the image data was pornography. So I went in and I'm like, oh, I'm going to see, what if I put in some innocuous terms? I'll put in USA, I'll put in patriot, okay, I'll put in Arab, I'll put in Jew, I'll put in Black, I'll put in woman. And it was just obvious that they had sort of trawled the bottom dregs of the internet in order to get training data. So these are the things that really piss me off. And again, stories that keep me up at night. The Future of Privacy Forum has done a phenomenal job categorizing both individual as well as societal harms. I really, really like it. And I've mentioned some of these, right? Loss of opportunity, economic loss, social detriment, loss of liberty. But I think as practitioners, we need to start here. We need to think about what is the kind of relationship that we ultimately want to have with artificial intelligence. And when thinking about this question, there are three things that, three principles for data trust and transparency that IBM came up with, right? The one is the purpose of AI is not to displace humans. It is meant to augment human intelligence. And we as practitioners need to ask ourselves, what is the experience like of a human once they've been augmented? What is it like for them? The second, data and insights associated with those data belong to the creator alone. This is about consent, right? Are you gathering your data in such a way where you're indeed making sure you've gleaned consent? And then the third is that our AI systems have to be both transparent as well as explainable. And I'll talk a lot about what this means. When thinking about what it takes to trust AI, to earn trust in AI, we believe there's a number of fundamental questions, right? And the first one, is it fair? But there's a big warning sign, a big caution around that question. Fair according to whom? Because my definition of fairness may not be your definition of fairness. And it totally depends on who you're actually talking to. So taking the time as an organization to think through whose definition of fairness. Is it equality? Is it equity? Is it something else? Is it accessibility to information? Like whose definition? Explainability. Is it easy to understand? As I'm using an AI to make a decision that may affect somebody's livelihood, can I go and find out what data was used in order to make this decision about me, right? Adversarial robustness, is it tamper-proof? Could I spoof it, trick it in order to disadvantage one group over another or advantage one group over another? Is it accountable? Can I go somewhere, appropriately where the AI is actually making the decision or gleaning the data and find out when was the last time this was audited? What's the level of accuracy of this model? Who's accountable for this model? What data was used? What's the data lineage and provenance? What's the level of expertise? And then of course, does it protect my data? You're gonna hear me repeat this about 5 times. This is not a technical problem. Earning trust in AI is not a technical problem with a technical solution. It is a socio-technical problem. And when it's a socio-technical problem, you require a holistic approach, right? There is no easy button to do this. This is hard work. And if anybody tells you anything different, I hope like the hairs in the back of your neck stand up, because I want you to remember this is hard work. You've got to be focused on people, process, tools. People meaning what is the right culture required to curate AI responsibly within an organization. Process meaning what are the right AI governance standards and processes, and tools meaning tools and AI engineering frameworks. I want to start with this definition of the word data, because I just came back from the big knowledge management summit and I got up on stage and I was asking people, what's your definition of data? What's your definition of data? What's your definition of data? There's so much we need to unlearn in this space. I would opine this as a definition of the word data, because data is not truth. Data is an artifact of the human experience. And we humans create the data, or the machines that create the data. And we humans are incredibly fallible. We have 188 biases and counting. And I know this is really small print, but you can actually look this up, the Cognitive Bias Codex. There's very good reasons why we have biases as humans, right? And you can see like from what should we remember? We have a need to act fast. There's not enough meeting. And this is why our biases have come to be. But if we are not committed to curating, or if we are not, as we work towards being responsible curators of AI, we have to be committed to introspectively looking into a mirror and really recognizing what our biases are, right? And I love this statement: prejudice is an emotional commitment to ignorance. So being hyper aware of our biases because our data is biased. This is a common myth. Most people think that 100% of the effort around making AI is coding, when in fact, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, over 70% is just figuring out like what is the right data to use, which means we need people trained to ask very, very hard questions about data, right? First of all, is this even the right use case for AI? Does it augment human intelligence, like I mentioned? But then asking hard questions like, was this gathered with consent? Is this indeed representative? Is this the right data to be using for something like this? Am I working with my domain experts? What's the lineage? What's the provenance? Another common myth is that ethics is like some kind of checklist, like Q&A at the very end, right before you go and deploy a product. It's not true. As soon as you've got like a glimmer, a glint in your eye about using AI to solve a problem, that's where ethics begins, right? And when you think about the space of AI governance, right, there's organizational AI governance, and then there's automated AI model governance. Organizational AI governance meaning, what are your principles for how you're going to use AI, right? What's your definition of fairness? Do you have an AI ethics board? Do you have an AI ethics board that people will want to use? What are the incentive structures around how people use this ethics boards? Do you have whistleblower protections? Do you have communication strategies? Do you have education programs so the people in procurement know how to buy an AI that is indeed going to be responsibly curated? That's organizational AI governance. And then automated AI model governance is where you see the AI engineering frameworks, the tools that are used for audits. So I want to tell you a client story that really made an impact on me. So there's a large company that had approached us. They had procured an AI model to infer the skill sets of their employees, right? And it was originally bought to infer the technical skills of people. So it would tell you, for example, Muninder, on a scale from 0 to 5, what is your communication skill, right? What is your level of skill? So we found out that they wanted to expand the use of this model beyond technical skill to include soft skills or foundational skills, like what kind of a leader are you, a scale from 0 to 5, right? When we found out about their intent, we said, hold up, we want to have a specialized design thinking session with you, where we want to think through with you as a team, what are potential secondary and tertiary unintended effects of such an approach? And we told them, before we start, when we do this, we want the most diverse and inclusive of a group of people that you can get your hands on. Bring the heads of your business resource groups. Bring your chief diversity inclusivity officer. We want diversity, 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 because the hardest part of this effort is, again, getting people to be empathetic towards others, right? So the stickies that you're seeing here are around a totally different use case. It was around if you were to design or develop a virtual assistant that was going to be put into the rooms of a hotel, like the Hilton or the Marriott. So the primary intent for something like this would be to enrich interactions for guests and staff members. And then you'll see secondary, intended and known, and tertiary, unintended and possibly known effects, right? The tertiary part is the hardest part. That's why you want diversity and inclusivity on your team doing this effort. So you get the potential harm, and then if you go to the moving to mechanisms and ethical hacking, you take one of those potential harm stickies and you say, okay, what are the values of this company? This is what we did with the client. What are the values of your company? Given these values, what are the rights of your employees? What are their rights? And then given these rights and that potential harm, how would you design in order to mitigate for this harm? And we do this with high school kids. This is not hard to do if you've got a truly diverse team doing it. So we did this with this particular client, right? And at the end of 4.5 hours, they say to us, they said, okay, we need to make sure we can't invest in a black box model. We need to make sure we have a communication strategy. We need to make sure we have education programs. Will you teach our team of data scientists, can you teach them how to assess for disparate impact and how to mitigate for risk holistically? So I said, absolutely, we'll train your people. And they said, we don't want you to install anything on our systems, and we're only going to show you output data for things we feel are innocuous. So we're not going to show you gender, we're not going to show you race, we're not going to show you ethnicity. We're going to show you tenure. Okay, tenure. So remember what this AI model does, right? Is it infers the soft skills of employees. So we're looking at the output data for tenure, and we keep seeing this interesting pattern, right? Even senior vice presidents and directors kept getting zeros, 0 on a scale from 0 to 5 for communication, 0 for leadership, 0 for critical thinking, 0, 0, 0. And we asked them, we said, were you expecting this? No, is their answer. Did you ever inform these new employees what data is being used to infer their skill sets? No. Did you ever inform their managers to not use this AI model to fire people? No. And I wanted you to hear this story because I've started leaning into making comics for art therapy. Being in this space, I need lots of art therapy, and I made this comic to make a point. Because you will hear when you go to AI summits and you'll hear people up on stage talking about automatically mitigating for risk. I want you to remember this story, right? There's no way to automatically mitigate for that kind of risk. This is why I'm saying it's a socio-technical challenge, and why we need to be focused on people and what is communicated and making sure we're having really difficult conversations with how AI is being used. So a little bit more on culture. This is IBM's timeline of sorts with respect to like what we've been doing within this space. So back in 2015, we hired an AI ethics leader. And it wasn't until 2018 when the first IBM AI Ethics Board was stood up, 3 years later. What happened in 2018? In 2018, Joy Boluswamy at MIT published a report called Gender Shades on bias in facial recognition. And they called out IBM as well as a number of different companies. And IBM pulled out of facial recognition and stood up this board and established principles. So I want you to hear this so that you can understand the power of academia, right? In terms of being able to influence changes like this one, okay? And again, since then, there have been a number of great things that have happened within IBM, including a big emphasis on culture, including things like looking at our teams of data scientists and asking ourselves the question, how many women are on this team? How many minorities are on this team, right? Referencing things like the diversity prediction theorem. And note, we came out in the spring with a fantastic report called the Institute for Business Value. It's called AI Ethics in Action. It's publicly available. Do download it because there's some fantastic statistics in here about the information gap, right? The gender gap with respect to who's designing and developing and curating AI, and how different that is in terms of who's being employed by the actual companies themselves. So you start with the foundation, that values diversity, equity, inclusivity, but then on top of it, you build a real culture that values multidisciplinary teams and pushes for it hard, really, really pushes for it hard, because you can't curate AI responsibly without multidisciplinary teams. And this is, I'm telling you, this is the hardest part for you when you start working out in the field, right? And this is another comic, which again, I get so frustrated being in this space. I go to AI summits, I read articles, read white papers on the subject of AI ethics, and it is being communicated and written for people who self-categorize as data scientists, machine learning scientists, and computer scientists, and not everybody else. And I'm telling you, we actually need everybody else. We need everybody working together in this space. This is a snippet of a risk assessment form that a big tech giant has publicly made available, just a small snippet. And I went to meet with the chief responsible AI officer for the company that went and made this publicly available. And I told her, I said, I really respect you that you went and you published this publicly, you published your practitioner training, your standards, like, thank you for doing that. And she says to me, she says, you have no idea, it was such a battle. People did not want me. They did not want me to make this publicly available. And I said, I bet I know what the problem you have is when you're looking at how people fill out this form. And she says, what? Because it's a much longer form. This is just a snippet, right? And I said, I bet you have very few people filling this out completely, and that they're not putting enough thought into it. And she said, yes, yes. And she says, it's because the people filling it out are typically the data scientists or the AI model owners, and not multidisciplinary teams. And after that call, I wanted to show you this, because I made this on the airplane on the way back. You don't need to take humanities courses, Bob. You're getting an AI/ML degree. Congratulations, you deployed the AI model to help our clients determine interest rates on loans in record time. New York Times saying, AI models systematize redlining in disadvantaged communities. And here you've got Bob saying, what's redlining? It starts in education. It starts in education. So as we talk about where should our data and AI ethics programs sit in higher ed institutions, we need to make damn sure that it's truly multidisciplinary. Another thing that we've been doing in IBM, again, with respect to culture, to really push this idea for multidisciplinary teams and getting people hands-on applied learning. We did a project with the Titanic, right? Where we imagined, okay, what if we were to curate an AI that would offer passengers predictions on the likelihood that they're going to get a life raft or not, right? And we stood up a trustworthy AI center of excellence. And we said, okay, not just for this project, but in general across IBM. And we said, we don't care what your background is at IBM. If you're a designer, psychologist, data scientist, we don't care. If you're interested in this space, you're invited. We're going to work on projects together. And this is one of our earlier ones. So we split into two different teams. One team was the team of data scientists who were working on the explainers, crunching the numbers and making the predictions. And the other team was the team of social scientists, right? Psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, designers, thinking through how the heck do we empower somebody in this situation? How do we offer progressive disclosure for something like the likelihood that they're going to get a life raft? And we had used a semi-fictitious data set off of Kaggle to go through this. And the most valuable part of this exercise was getting people to recognize the value of other people's knowledge and other people's skills, right? Having the data scientists listen to the designers and vice versa when they get up on stage presenting this body of work. That was the most valuable part. Here's another example of a project that we did in a multidisciplinary fashion. you'll see, again, these big words that we throw out, explainability and accountability or accuracy, et cetera, et cetera. We wanted to get down to what are the feature and function, what are functional and non-functional requirements for projects. As we're talking to clients who say, explainability is very important to me. What does that mean actually in terms of feature and function? So we approached it with this idea of this lens of service level agreements, right? And so this isn't a judging tool at all. Again, this is just a framework to think through, like, how do we have these conversations with clients around feature and function for these major pillars? And we curated a number of architectural assets in our cognitive architect tool, but then we delivered a codex of sorts. And I just want to give you a snippet of what one of these looks like. Again, this is just a small little sliver, but something like explainability, right? Service level agreement 0 would mean it's not applicable. Like, let's say, for example, you are making you have an AI model that's making predictions about ants in an ant farm and how they're going to move. SLA 0 might be perfectly acceptable for the pillar of data privacy, meaning there's no feature and function required for ants moving in an ant farm. So here you've got SLA 0 for explainability. Service level agreement 1, which is like the tiniest step forward, is giving a reason code, right? I want to know, why this decision was made about what percent interest rate I got on my loan. And it's giving me some Porpy reason code. And the next one is explanations are co-located within the model's determination. And the third is everything in SLA 2, but a detailed explanation as to why a model makes one determination over another. It's kind of like the Cadillac, right? So that was another project that we did, again, in a multidisciplinary fashion. This is yet another project where we took a hard look as technologists. How do we think about the design of our technologies to protect against true malintent, like abusive use of technology? For example, like domestic abusers. And we came up with 5 design principles, and we curated, like, how could our tech be used to cause harm? And again, the more knowledgeable we technologists, we practitioners are of this space, the more we can be thinking about design that can really be crafted to protect people. In that same Institute for Business Value study that I referenced that came out in spring, we noticed there's, again, wonderful statistics that came out of there, including things like the changing of the guard. In 2015, we found about 15% of leaders in company sites that were in charge of risk and compliance or AI ethics within their organization were non-technical, right? They were the CTOs, et cetera. Now it's 80% are non-technical. So I wanted to show you that because that's a big change. I get asked this question all the time. Like, I totally believe in what you're saying, but I don't have enough power where I'm sitting in my organization. Or you might ask, what could I do outside of my day job in order to promote the responsible use of AI? Make this knowledge more accessible to more people. I find it crazy that if you're lucky enough to take a class in data and AI ethics in a higher ed institution, it's typically marketed and communicated and curated for students who self-categorize in a certain way as data scientists, as machine learning scientists, as computer scientists, and not everybody else. Not our next generation of legislators, not our doctors. I mean, think about it. AI is going to be used in every single industry. Every single industry. It's going to impact every single job. And why are we not teaching these concepts to high school students or even middle school students? We have to be better. We have to be better at making this be a much more inclusive conversation, right? And this is actually a conversation that I actually had. I was on a panel at a summit sitting next to a dean saying, treating AI responsibly is truly a multidisciplinary effort. And here's the dean saying, gee, where should that sit? The School of Humanities or at School of Engineering? And I'm like, see, this is the problem. This is the problem. The answer is both. Of course, it's multidisciplinary. It's multidisciplinary. So have any of you guys ever been to Marbles Museum in downtown Raleigh? You guys have young kids? Well, I'm on the board of advisors for Marbles, and they have an annual Kids Code event there. And I was invited to go and present on whatever I wanted to present at that year. And my thinking was, okay, I want to introduce this subject of transparent and explainable AI to really young kids. Like, how young can I go? How young can I go? So I worked with Raleigh Charter High School students. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that school, but we co-created an AI-powered Harry Potter sorting hat. You guys know Harry Potter, right? The book. You put the hat in the book, put the hat on your head, and it uses magic to kind of mine your brain and then tell you which Hogwarts house you're in. So I bought a hat just like the one that you see here, look just like the sorting hat. There's a microphone hidden in the hat. It was connected to a laptop running a natural language processor, with a very simple sorting algorithm, so that if a kid says something, it would categorize them into a Hogwarts house. And then the Raleigh Charter High School kids, they were wonderful. Like, they were really into robotics. So they even put, using Lego Mindstorm, they made robotic lips for the hat, and they had the audio from the movie. So the hat would literally say Hufflepuff, just like that from the movie, right? So it was awesome. What I didn't tell anybody was I rigged the hat such that if any of my kids were to put the hat on their head and say something I guess they would say, it would put them into Slytherin, which I knew would piss them off. Not that there's anything wrong with Slytherin. I've had that argument before with people who've heard my talk saying there's nothing wrong with Slytherin. You're missing the point. Nothing wrong with Slytherin. So we get up on stage and it works like a charm, right? I've got all these wonderful students who are the hat is putting them into all these great houses, Ravenclaw and Gryffindor and Hufflepuff. And then my daughter, who is 14 at the time, she gets up on stage and she says something I guess she would say. The hat works beautifully. Slytherin. And she crosses her arms and she glares at me and she says, "Mom, you rigged the hat." And I said, "Let this be a lesson to you. Never trust an AI that's not fully transparent and explainable. You should be able to ask the hat, what data did you use about me to put me into Slytherin?" Which actually inspired this next comic, right? Because I wanted to use this hilarious story about using pop culture to introduce the subject to kids. I also wanted to use this as a way to teach practitioners not to math-splain your models. So it's kind of like a 2-for-1, using humor to introduce all kinds of things to all kinds of people. Anyway, so another thing that we've used with kids, and this one I've done with middle school kids, this is a fantastic game that introduces kids to algorithmic bias. And I did this with Girl Scout troops last spring, and it worked really, really well. It was just a really fun game, and it kicked off a lot of wonderful conversations. MindSpark, this is an organization that IBM contributes to. They curate curriculum for K through 12 teachers. So this is specifically for the teachers. And I've made a number of videos, and we've done a bunch of content specifically for them. There's Open PTech, where there's videos and other content that's available to students for free and online. But my friend, Ross Smith at Microsoft, who has a similar role to mine, he and I co-created a nonprofit called Future World Alliance, which Ishita is one of our interns for. And we have now over 40 members, and it's basically practitioners just like us who are furious by what we're seeing and horrified. And we want to do something in particular with respect to data and AI ethics curriculum for K through 12. So we've got, members from tech companies around the world, but we also have game designers and songwriters and high school teachers, and we're going after NSF grants, with science museums. And it is also another wonderful way to be able to plug in and curate learning and get closer to what students are thinking and doing. Okay, I'm going to take a breath. Please feel free to reach out to me if I can answer any questions, and I'm happy to take any questions now as well. I know I gave you a lot of stuff to think about.